Those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Puckett. I work over in the United States Army. I run the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. I've been playing in this world of continuous ATO for going on now 6 years. I was fortunate enough to play a role in some of the first iterations of this in the intelligence community back in 2015. We had an initiative at NGA that we called ATO in a Day. And a lot of what you see even today, I think a lot has progressed in the sense of technology. Obviously, technology has changed tremendously, and I think we all know that technology have the opportunity to dramatically improve our processes that we have put in place, and I see a lot of change kind of over the time. One thing that I think hopefully you take away from part of what we're diving into here over in the United States Army when it comes to trying to apply a continuous ATO, kind of a continuous authorization, but I would argue kind of more so a continuous risk management, which is what we're going to be talking about here, is there's a major play with people. We talk about culture change a lot, and I hope what you take away from this is we're trying to be super mindful when it comes to how we bring the community along. A lot of people talk about kind of the frozen middle, or the compliance-driven kind of world that we have when it comes to security. Is if we're going to come with new technology, new processes, there's a lot of upskilling that needs to be done and a lot of people that we need to bring along. I also want to give a shout out to my friend, Jason Hess, who is no longer with us. But Jason Hess, actually an Air Force Tech Sergeant, a retired Air Force Tech Sergeant. And I would argue the major bones of even what we see today with continuous ATO is a framework that he dreamt up back in 2014 with a small crew over at NGA. So major thanks to Jason for kind of being the great catalyst to this. And then I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Hannah Hunt, who will introduce herself.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, I'm Hannah Hunt. I'm the Chief of Product at the Army Software Factory. Previously was the Chief of Staff at the Air Force's Kessel Run, which was spoken about a bit earlier today. It's really great to be able to come to the Army and help the Army stand up its first initiative to have organic software development run by soldiers. Our tagline is by soldiers for soldiers. We spend a considerable amount of time bringing in soldiers. We have every 6 months, we bring in 30 soldiers and Department of the Army civilians to get upskilled in building software products. And then they go out and actually solve Army problems. So our first round of software teams have just kicked off their software development efforts. We're obviously very much in close partnership with the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency to ensure that both our app teams and the broader Army can leverage a lot of the tools and processes that we are working towards, including the continuous risk management framework. So we're super excited. I'm super excited to be here to talk about the work that we're doing together and how we're kind of driving that change within the Army.
Sweet deal. Let's go to the next slide. So there's definitely a partnership here. So when it comes to the role of the ECMA, for those that are not aware, essentially the ECMO at the time, the Enterprise Cloud Management Office, was stood up in order to accelerate the Army's adoption of cloud computing, but I would argue more so the adoption of cloud native design principles, as well as modern software development, understanding just the profound impact that software has across the world today. And we see that as a major foundational element to really get after then our data. We've seen our ability to leverage the cloud as a strategic asset to be critical for machine learning and artificial intelligence. But one of the first things when I first came on board and briefed the Secretary of the new vision for the Army, moving towards an enterprise shared services model, leveraging the cloud, leaning into modern software development, he emphasized the need when it came to the Army building soldiers and contributing when it comes to establishing a software factory. So not just having a CI/CD pipeline, a DevSecOps ecosystem, but really leaning heavily into the soldiers of the Army when it comes to upskilling them so that they can be enabled on the battlefield with the ability to wield software as essentially a weapon. And so this established a partnership where doing this at the scale of the Army is relatively hard. You can't really boil the ocean. And so the ECMA and AFC partnered when it came to standing up the software factory, as well as the ECMA delivering a DevSecOps ecosystem that is really the foundation for, I would say, a few different things. One, the delivery of common enterprise services when it comes to modern software development in a secure ecosystem with appropriate guardrails for people to move quickly and have essentially the ability to have continuous risk management in how we field software. But more importantly, it's really a proving ground and a place to grow the skills of not just soldiers within the software factory, but really the Army writ large. And what you're going to hear throughout some of the briefing today is how we're focusing on establishing policy and guidance for all of the authorizing officials, all of the P-isms across the Army. Reimagining the world of a security control assessor in the Army is starting to bring these tools to become more commonplace across the Army. And we see that being an absolutely critical enabler for the Army and how we field software. We see that as foundational to the mission and the vision and really the value proposition here when it comes to what we're trying to deliver for the Army. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the CREATE ecosystem. I don't think we're going to blow anyone's minds here. We're not really doing something crazy outside of the norm, obviously ascribing to when it comes to the reference design. When we talk about DevSecOps, we're absolutely leaning into an open source based Kubernetes platform aligned with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And of course, the ecosystem of the common tools around continuous integration and delivery when it comes to the DevSecOps ecosystem of CREATE. So CREATE intending to be really that foundational core when it comes to this digital transformation movement around modern software development, and really the first of a number of customers that we have to be in the software factory. We also have an initiative, which is a partnership around all things tactical cloud when it comes to our CPCE. And so Project Ridgeway, an initiative born out of FORCECOM and 18th Airborne Corps, leveraging 82nd and 101st divisions, is partnering with PEOC3T, and they're also currently customers of CREATE. And we've got a few other PEOs and a few other commands that are also leaning in heavily when it comes to how we leverage modern software development and fielding software globally across the Army. Next slide. All right. So I'm just going to kind of go to the next slide here because I'll probably weave in a little bit of the history of cRMF and cATO, if you don't mind. But as I said, played a role over at NGA. And one of the things that we leaned into heavily over at NGA was this notion of inheritable controls when it came to kind of a layered approach to the cloud. And so one of the first iterations of this is actually delivering essentially a common controls provider, essentially a CCP, which should be a context that everyone's aware of. What we did is when we were over to NGA, the delivery of our enterprise cloud shared services was really the first CCP at NGA at the time. But what we did is we realized that when you deliver a DevSecOps ecosystem, when we talk about the tools that starts to get as far left as we possibly can in software development, is we start to really deliver inheritable controls when it comes to some of the configuration management controls, when it comes to some of the change management processes. And we start to hit at, if people are using essentially a Git repository, if we're orchestrating any kind of merge into master going through a number of validation checks, is we're actually starting to hit a number of the controls that really get after more so the process side of the house, and not just the technological controls of how a system is built. And so what we leaned into is we actually accredited our DevSecOps ecosystem at the time as a common controls provider that started to eat away at some of those procedural security controls. So if software teams could prove and validate, and if we could test that they were actually using these tools and these resources, we could say that we inherit those controls that start to get after some of the application development stig. What we did is we took that a little bit of a step further, and we realized, hey, if we start to deliver common services of the actual hosting platform and ecosystem from the runtime perspective, we can also deliver a number of inheritable controls as well. And really this framework from not just the cloud common shared services, but also getting after the procedural side of the house, as well as then the technical controls of the actual hosting platform, is the framework that we put in place back in 2016 when we first went live. And so I think the first iterations of this really starting to deliver capability into production, landing around November of 2016 over at NGA, which was right around the time when DIUX leaned in. And so we ended up being the first accrediting body for the fabled Tinker planning tool. And what happened is this framework essentially became the framework that became the first continuous ATO that Ms. Lauren Knausenberger signed in, I do believe, if the timeline is right, just about April 2018. So DIUX growing and spinning into Kessel Run. And so roughly about a year and a half later, after kind of the first foray, we saw the first continuous ATO. But really this inheritable controls model is really critical. But what we can do is we can start to kind of tease out some of the tools and services that need to exist in the tech stack as technology changes. So for instance, when we talk about the actual software factory platform, we're leveraging Kubernetes. There's a whole bunch of different threat vectors that exist, especially from the build components of software into the actual runtime components. And what's really critical here is I want to kind of reiterate to people is being very mindful of your architecture and your design. When you start to talk about essentially multi-tenants within shared clusters, or if you talk about essentially every tenant getting their own cluster when it comes to Kubernetes, that has an impact when it comes to the various threat vectors that you have and the blast radius that you have, especially as we move into a zero trust paradigm. So following this model, we received our ATO for Create this year in March. And that same day, we were live in production for 2 applications that were then continuously delivering capability into production, leveraging this framework and our DevSecOps playbook that we penned, and essentially is a playbook for all AOs, developers, security teams, as well as platform operation teams for the Army. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Miss Hannah Hunt to kind of take it into a little bit more deeper depths when we talk about all things software factory and how we're applying the methodology.
Great, thanks, Paul. Before we move to the next slide, the 2 applications that are referenced here are applications that the Software Factory has developed in its pilot efforts. One that focuses, the Castle application that focuses on automating the mechanism of which supply depots can sort, pick, and ship supplies downrange. It's a very manual process right now, and we built an application. And then the My Squad application, there's a movement among, or an initiative for the Sergeant Major of the Army called This Is My Squad. Squad leaders are the lowest level of a team in the Army. So we're building an application for them to be able to effectively communicate with their squad members and their platoon leaders. Right now, all that is done on WhatsApp or through text message, a lot of shadow IT. So there's a real need to have an Army-approved software solution that can better support these squads as they're both building out their workloads and tasks and events that they have, but also ensuring that there is constant feedback and communication because the Army's #1 priority right now is people. And so we are focusing heavily on this effort. Next slide, please. So among the many roles that I have, one of them is to support our DevSecOps ecosystem. We have numerous products that sit in that DevSecOps ecosystem, one of which we call source code push, basically a path to production for application teams that are leveraging, pushing code through GitLab, very kind of your common practice. And it allows application teams to be able to deploy into cArmy following the security guardrails that we've defined in the DevSecOps playbook. It's a very similar model that you see in other places, but the real intent here is that if you meet the security threshold, you have approval from, in our case, we call them application security validation engineers. Other organizations could call them assessors. Other organizations could call them ISMs. But really, the person who understands security, understands compliance, you can go into production. And so we've done that now twice. We have 4 other application teams within the software factory that will be going through this process very soon. And then we'll have enterprise Army customers that can leverage this too once we get to general availability. Right now we're in a closed beta, but we've done a ton of interviews with a variety of Army enterprise customers that want to leverage this service for themselves, and we're really excited to be able to support them in the near term. We're also looking at other patterns for for production. One of them, and one that we're finding, is that some organizations want to have access, want their developers or their users to have access to underlying Kubernetes clusters for a variety of reasons. We hear this a lot with data scientists. There's an initiative with the Army AI Task Force called COIUS that provides this. And so we're building a product that allows application teams to be able to manage their own Kubernetes clusters. It's a very different model than what we're currently employing. We're doing a lot of discovery and research to ensure that a lot of the zero trust security practices that we're conducting here fall into this new security mode. So we'll be looking at various, right now we're in IL4. We'll be looking at various impact levels as use cases arise. We've already been asked for IL5, IL6, but we're starting small and incrementally making changes, making sure that we're providing these offerings based on user feedback versus kind of prescribed solutions. So we're building things that make sense for what the users need at the time. Anything else you want to touch on here, Paul?
Yeah, so just a few things I want to tease out. So you heard Hannah talk about the path to production as well as a few different types of products. So one thing is not all developers are created equal and not all applications and services are created equal. So when you think of growing soldiers and building soldiers, not everyone joining the Army is diving into the Army and is going to be a certified Kubernetes developer or application developer. And so what we want to create are essentially higher levels of the abstraction so that we can simplify and also empower our soldiers to be contributors to the fight. But that's not to say that that's really the only design pattern. For those that start to hold a bit more opinions when it comes to technology and the tech stack, is actually delivering a repeatable kind of path to production for them as well. So you heard about source code push, but you also heard about essentially a manage your own cluster type of paradigm. What that shifts is essentially how you mitigate risk along the way and what types of kind of say overwatch, if you will, exists in order to allow them to move quickly. And so when you talk about kind of continuous risk management, I think it's one of those things we should also keep in mind is there are probably going to be different design patterns that would complement different initiatives, as well as even different type of mission areas. The last point that I'll really nuance here as well is oftentimes I see a lot of people that dive into the domain wanting to get to a continuous ATO and leveraging CI/CD pipeline and modern development tools. Is they start at really the beginning of like a CI/CD pipeline when it comes to how they kind of get after their challenge. And I would argue part of how you frame up essentially continuous risk management is you have to understand the operational end state as to where you need to deploy and kind of where you're fighting, if you will, when it comes to the software that you're fielding. And what you should be walking back is ways that you can establish from the production environment a path to production that meets your developers where they are. And in doing so, what you're able to do is you're essentially creating scaffolding where you're addressing either in operations or as part of their DevSecOps ecosystem, things that your developers aren't going to be responsible for in order to simplify their focus and their scope of work to be able to focus on their users, to be able to focus on their user experience, to be able to focus on the next most important feature to be added. But if you start to make things too complicated for your developers where they have to hold too many opinions in the tech stack, what you're going to find is you're going to lose velocity, whereas you could hold perhaps a higher opinion in the tech stack that will allow your teams to move fast. And again, this depends on the mission. It also depends on the maturity of your development teams. And so that's something that we're trying to be mindful of is meet our customers where they are, but then also give them opportunity to be able to move faster. I see that there was a hand raised, and so just want to make sure we're being mindful and also timely. I want to say it was Alan. I can't see the actual list of who's in the meeting anymore. I guess not. Okay, hand it back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Something I too want to emphasize here is what we're really finding is that we can train Army soldiers to build this platform too. So we've spent a significant amount of resources to have soldier platform engineers that are working with various customers to get their applications into production. And there's no shortage of talent within the Army. We've been able to tap into an awesome network of soldiers, enlisted officers, warrant officers that are very excited to be able to like build this capability, not just for software factory applications that service other Army customers and enterprise use, but broader Army implications too. So it's not just the training component of them understanding how Linux administration, Kubernetes, how they are learning cybersecurity standards, but actually implementing that in an operational context. And it's already, we're on NIPR, we're on IL4, so it's already live and in production on a DoD network. So it's very exciting, the times that we're in. If you want to go to the next slide, something we wanted to emphasize and something that Paul just spoke about before is the idea of, because we're a Kubernetes-based platform, how do we ensure that our containers are secure? We recently deployed a solution called Aquasec, which runs scans of all the images in our repo, make sure that if there's any malware or vulnerabilities in containers, we can quickly remedy them. And it tracks any CVEs and network firewalls. The team just deployed this a few weeks ago and have already seen benefit in being able to update like their latest Docker files or other kinds of software. So it's working in real time. These are just screenshots of what it is live. You probably can't really see it, but the point is that we are caring not just about the security of the applications themselves, but also kind of the underlying platform offering and ensuring that we're meeting a lot of those requirements for our ATO. Anything you want to add here, Paul?
Yeah, just a few different things. This is also starting to tease into what I was talking about before when it comes to building people and building awareness. When it comes to more common tools, is understanding all of the vectors. Getting an echo. Understand all the threat vectors that exist when it comes to the build components, but then also thinking about what day two looks like. So, as you've authorized some running application and a container image to now go be in production, there's obviously a log of that and understanding like what's running in production. But then there's also monitoring when it comes to behavior detection of what's actually happening within the actual service itself. Monitoring all of the ingress and egress, so what's happening when you talk about some of the east-west, if you will, communication, understanding essentially cluster-to-cluster communication that's happening. There's all these different vantage points that you need to have visibility into, and getting to the point of kind of where is that new kind of visualization space as well, is aggregating this data in a way that empowers not only your operations teams, but also your security teams to be able to see how they're able to manage risk in real time. I see a lot of times there's a lot of focus on just empowering the developers here, but part of what we're trying to really do is bring the Army along for the people that need to be contributors in this domain, in this ecosystem, is how we create appropriate guardrails and how we empower developer security and operation teams to have the same level of visibility. And I'll tease out probably a few more pieces of that a little bit later on, but that would be this. You want to go to the next slide, please? So this is another key component kind of to that point of that relationship, is understanding who is responsible for what when it comes to continuous risk management as you move into this world of DevSecOps. And so when you think about developer teams that are writing lines of code, obviously those lines of code have typically third-party dependencies. And so for instance, some of the lines of codes themselves could have some vulnerabilities when it comes to some code quality that's security relevant, but also could have some third-party dependencies as well. And so you start to ask, well, who is responsible for essentially those third-party dependencies and making them available, especially in a disconnected environment? And so at this point, we start to talk about some of the service level objectives and service level agreements when it comes to teams and how they interact. So for instance, if your platform team is providing essentially the components for build, and there's an issue when it comes to a vulnerability of a third-party dependency, but it requires the development team to make some changes, you've got to be able to flag what looks like wrong, and you've also got to be able to not just be able to rebuild the container image, but it means that some action needs to be taken by your developers. And so that establishes really, you need to have service level objectives and service level agreements when it comes to ensuring that your ability to continually manage risk doesn't also come at kind of the expense of operations itself. And so these trades essentially puts people in a position where, well, if you don't remediate in X period amount of time, is we've got to take your system down because it's now a running vulnerability. So our ability to continuously build and continuously deploy also means we also have to have this ability to continuously hold each other accountable to a service level objective and a service level agreement for how teams are going to essentially work together. And this really requires transparency around roadmaps. It also requires a whole bunch of clarity when it comes to even the contracts and how we write them. And so I think many are living this we've seen a number of successes, but it's still not mainstream when it comes to the right language and context to establish within a contract itself to be flexible, but still yet to be able to allow the government to hold people accountable when it comes to delivering services kind of when they are needed, obviously in context of feedback from customers. And I would also argue this is a requirement from a skill set perspective, even the government, to be able to really be good integrators and stewards and orchestrators or even deliverers of capabilities themselves as we get to a more hybrid model of teams where it's not just contractors and it's not just government, but we start to see a lot of mingling across teams, which means that typically the government would meet an SLA or an SLO as a deliverable within a contract. Is that this kind of is begging that question that something needs to live as an authority outside of a given contract with a contractor and more kind of contracts amongst teams when it comes to how we operate. Hannah, anything you want to add to this slide?
Yeah, a few things. The big thing I want to emphasize is we are highly transparent in what our roadmap items are, as well as what our SLOs are. If anybody asks for these documents, we readily give them. We'll have a more public-facing website soon, either on MillSuite or elsewhere, so that people can pull them down anytime they want and know what their response time will be, what are the current things that we are caring about, and what we offer and who we offer it to. That's really critical to both allowing teams to understand what they should expect from their platform teams, but also so that we can better prepare for future work that needs to be done based on user feedback. That's something that we've really emphasized here, is that it's not just about the technology choices that we're making, but it's based on the user outcomes that we need to drive. So we're not treating platform like a big tech stack of a bunch of different tools, but rather as a product of which has outcomes and roadmaps and user stories and all kind of the 9 yards of it, which is a relatively different approach than what you see typically. So we are taking that very, very seriously. So that's all I'll say. I think that's the last slide too. So I think we can, I don't know how much time we have left, but we can open it up for some questions before I think Matt is up after us.
Hi, this is Anna. If you have questions, please unmute to ask your question. Scott?
Hello, I'm from DISA, Defense Spectrum Organization. We're spinning up our own, we're following suit and spinning up DevSecOps philosophy, followed by a factory set of policies and procedures, and a little kind of for lack of a better word, a sidecar software portfolio for reuse. I'm pretty comfortable with the Kubernetes technology, but I have a little bit of a knowledge gap here. It seems like everything I'm seeing, when you talk about DevSecOps, you have to talk about containers. and there are a lot of different types of software components out there that we can for which we can develop faster timelines to field. Embedded systems, non-client server architectures that are legacy, admittedly, and probably need to be revised at some point. But so the gap is I lose it. I lose the connection when we come out of the end of the DevSecOps / software factory and immediately have to go into a container. Some of those make sense. Like if you're, doing microservices, that makes a lot of sense. If you're, if you have a true client-server relationship where the server's in the cloud, that makes sense. But what about if you want to get a new DLL out to a standalone system out in the field? I think that makes sense, but what's your take on containerizing the mechanism that would field that update installation? Is that also something that would go into a container? Do you follow my question? I know it's kind of,
I think I follow. Maybe I can repeat it back to you. I think you're asking the question is a container image the only deployable artifact that's possible from a DevSecOps ecosystem, or are there different essentially deployable artifacts when it comes to kind of the mission or even kind of the technological system that you have, right? I think you're asking.
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, exactly. No, we completely agree. There's a few different pieces here. One is understanding your deployable artifact, which is obviously going to be in context of your production environment, right? So like, hey, getting a new DLL out there, cool. Heck, even when we talk about running an analytic, if there's some ecosystem out there that understands how to run that analytic or that algorithm, again, it's not like you have to give that in a container image. I think what we're trying to acknowledge here is the most common and predominant means in order to deploy a fully functioning running service is going to take some form. And our ability to say, hey, this is how this service should look, both as a static kind of image as well as a running service, in order to be able to then say, it should always look like this, is a very beneficial thing when it comes to container images. But that's not to say that that's the only deployable artifact. For some reason, and I think this is part of the thing, is DevSecOps isn't just for people that ascribe to the new of technology. Is you can start to incorporate some components of DevSecOps really across the tech stack. You will be making trades, though, when it comes to how quickly you can move from an authorization perspective, right? And the other piece that I'd add there is both at the output of a CI/CD pipeline, not being just a container image, the input of a CI/CD pipeline and what your developer teams are responsible for doesn't also have to just be a container image. Part of our product line is, hey, just focus on building source code, and someone else is going to be responsible for the build and deploy and lifecycle management of a container image for you. Whereas other people might want to come with greater opinions, which means that they want to be the owners of the build process itself, even if we provide the common tools for that build process. So you're right and I would say both aspects, both the inputs as well as the outputs of a DevSecOps ecosystem. But like I said before, is you will be making trades, though, when it comes to how quickly you can move, because one of the benefits, right, of being able to say it looks and runs this way is that you've got a production platform that essentially understands how to handle that container image and how to run it at scale. When you don't have that capability in production, you're going to have to address essentially the lifecycle management of any deployable artifact that you field, which is going to have an impact on your ATO and your timelines. Does that help?
Very much, thanks. Yeah, we want to get everything to containerized applications, but there's a evolutionary timeline there, and so that actually filled in my knowledge gap. So thank you.
No worries. If anyone has any more questions, I think we're probably at time. I'm paul.b.puckett2.civ@army.mil. If you want to find me across tenants, I'm in 365. And Hannah, Lord knows what your middle initial is, but people can ping Hannah as well.
Yeah, hannah.e.hunt4.civ@mail.mil. You'll find me. There's only a few of us in the gal.